Informed Sources is made possible in part by Susie and Pierre G. Villery.
With a lifetime of passion for public television, we are pleased to help underwrite Informed Sources.
Please join us in supporting WYES TV.
Hello, I'm Marcia Cavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll take a special look this week at a force that keeps us all ticking, the economy. We'll look at the future in energy and technology, as well as the status of the music industry. And we will examine the condition of the economy and, in retrospect, the impact that the World's Fair had in developing it. That and an economist critical study that stirred the city's leaders and the chain of events triggered by the Civil Rights Act are on the agenda for tonight's Informed Sources. Errol, Laborde, producer of Informed Sources. LeBron Joseph, news anchor, WGNO-TV, Channel 26. Tony McAuley, staff writer, the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate. And Dave Cohen, news director, WWL Radio. And we will go first over to Errol right now. And you wanted to talk about a report that came out later in the a little bit past the mid part of the 20th century that really had some tough words for the New Orleans economy.
Well, it was 1975. Mm-hmm. It was an LSU economist named James Bobo put out a report called Pro Bono Publico, for the public good, which, by the way, is also the Rex motto too, even though it had nothing to do with it. But he came out and he got a lot of publicity. There was a newspaper, the afternoon newspaper, was the state's item, and it gave it a lot of coverage. And he said things that hadn't been said before. I mean, we're talking about the economy tonight, but people didn't talk about the economy very much. But with that report, and a couple of things he said is that he pointed out that New Orleans has a fairly well-established economic upper class, a huge economic lower class, with hardly any middle class. That something was missing there, and probably part of it had to do with that New Orleans was never a major manufacturing town. There was some manufacturing, but really not enough. There wasn't enough of those kind of jobs that creates a middle class. Now, part of the law, and it would get worse. It would get worse nationwide as manufacturing just across cities across America moved away. And so he really urged that New Orleans just really needed to do more, and so there were meetings were held. The mayor at the time was Moon Landrieu. He held a forum. At the time, Dutch Morial was running for mayor. Dutch Morial embraced it. In fact, Bobo wound up working for him in his campaign. And so this whole idea of economic rehab started. And so it was at least good that people were aware of it and thinking about it. I can't pinpoint any one thing now that says that made the economy better. It is better than it was back then, and it's a better economy. But as far as the thing about the middle class, what was curious is that he was an LSU NO professor, and people point out that one thing that's helped rebuild build a middle class in New Orleans is UNO. If you think about it, that UNO opened in 1958, and prior to 1958, there had never been a public university in New Orleans. There was one in Hammond, there was one in Thibodaux, and of course there was LSU and Lafayette. So any student at the age of going to college either had to afford to go to town or get a scholarship. So a lot of people were eliminated the possibility of getting a university education. And so that really helped to start things too. Right,
LSU and then of course University of New Orleans, as you said, really did grow the number of college graduates in our community because it afforded a post-secondary education, a good post-secondary education at a really affordable cost.
Yeah, and around that time, I think shortly after, SUNO started too, and that was in the same model. And so all of that was a good thing. We still don't have a big manufacturing. I think what back then what everybody was hoping for was eastern New Orleans, that great things would happen there, that there'd be plants moving in there and shipping companies, and that would be the salvation of New Orleans. And it never really happened. I mean, we never had the kind of growth that people were hoping for that area.
If I recall correctly, too, in Dr. Bobo's report, he was talking, he sort of warned about focusing too much on the tourism industry, which of course has really grown.
Yeah, well, he pointed out, he says, a lot of people, talk about tourism, and he says it's good we have tourism, but tourism is low-paying jobs. And so we don't have enough things with the high-paying jobs. And tourism is still low-paying jobs, but I've always said it's great at people skills, though. I mean, it's a good thing to have that. But he was just trying to tell us not to rely too much on that, not to say we're going to be a tourism city, that we needed to, be doing other things.
Right, we needed to broaden our economic base. And let's go on over right now to Tony and talk about that. Errol's referring to something that was written, what he said, in 1975, just urging New Orleans, grow that base of your economy. Well, certainly it has been since that time, but even looking forward to growing it even more in some newer areas. And Tony, I know you're going to talk to us about that. So which one first, energy or tech? Leave it to you.
Let's talk about energy. It's far bigger and more important and interesting on the UNO, touching on the UNO front there. One of the things that we're looking out for here to happen is whether or not we win a competition to get some of these federal dollars that are coming down the pike for infrastructure and so on, to have the Hydrogen Institute located at UNO. And the importance of that is hydrogen is one of these probably not that much talked about, but very key new energy frontiers. It's one that the old existing energy industry likes because it can build a lot on their infrastructure. And there's already a lot of sort of dirty hydrogen, you might call it, that's made from natural gas and even a little bit from coal. But the new hydrogen would be hydrogen that's made. Hydrogen is hydrogen once it's made, and when it's made, it's clean. And if it's made from clean energy like nuclear even, or wind or solar, then it's carbon free. So it's kind of like a holy grail, because one of the things about hydrogen is that it can convert energy that's created by solar and wind, which is dependent on whether the sun is shining or the wind is blowing, and store it and move it on pipelines and convert it into fuel cell batteries and all that kind of stuff. So there's a big push there. So the state, the governor announced in March that we were going to compete also for $1 billion for Louisiana, together with Arkansas and Oklahoma, to be one of the, I think it's 8 or 9 hydrogen hubs that they're going to finance, federal dollars are going to finance in the country. So there's a lot about the future of energy that we're sort of looking for here. It could be a big way to transition from the state, obviously, that was very heavily dependent on the old energy industry, where there used to be more than 100,000 jobs. Now down to 20 to 30,000 jobs. This could be the new wave of jobs. I will just say that on the sort of immediate energy front, it's the old energy industry that's been getting some big wins. There was massive liquefied natural gas investment projects announced this year over in Lake Charles, the Driftwood Tellurian project over there, $30 billion, and another one in Plaquemine, Venture Global. And that has to do with basically, world politics. The war in Ukraine has left the Europeans sort of finding that they're stranded for natural gas, and we can now export it from our hubs down here. Louisiana was the first to develop that in the U.S., and it's got a big pipeline even beyond these big projects to convert natural gas into liquid and send it over for export to markets like Europe that really want it. So that's jobs, not as many as in the old hydrocarbon industry, but quite a lot of jobs in some of these big plants that they've just decided to invest in. And then there's a further pipeline that of huge projects down the road as well on the old energy front, as well as the new. Well,
you mentioned wind and solar. Where does Louisiana stand? Our region here, New Orleans, Greater New Orleans region, and then all across Louisiana, really. Where do we stand with development of that?
Well, the governor, in his big sort of clean energy push, also targeted 5 gigawatts of wind energy in the Gulf. A lot of people have talked about this for many years. It's not it's not the right kind of wind. You know, it's what wind energy really likes is steady wind, like that blows up the plains. That's why you've got all those huge farms in North Texas, Oklahoma, and so on. But it can be done here, and it's basically now waiting on the first permissions to come through for people to build some of these offshore wind farms where they can be built here. And the target would be enough to power about 3 million homes in the Gulf region. So it's significant on the margin. And solar that's a big question, which we won't go into now. It's rife with politics in that you need your policymakers to set the tariffs so that community solar projects, individual house solar projects get paid for the energy properly, market rates for the energy. But if you've got a company as powerful as Entergy in your state, you're not going to get that right away.
Tech. Let's get you to touch on tech kind of briefly now, because we're running out of time with this segment.
Sorry.
That's okay. I mean, this is interesting and very important stuff. But we've seen the tech sector grow here too.
Yeah, the tech sector is small, of course. We're not a tech hub, but we've really established a niche in the gaming industry. We had some big wins recently, and I don't know what the company is, but there's another one that's going to be in about a month, another big new studio, which would make it, I think, the 7th gaming studio here. So the city really getting building a name for itself in that subsector of tech. Also, I know music is coming up as a topic here. There's a really hot company, 3 entrepreneurs who won the New Orleans Entrepreneur Week top prize earlier this year, called Jam Around. Those guys have just been shortlisted for the Pharrell Williams Black Ambition National Prize, which comes with $1 million. But even getting to the stage they've got to now means they get more investors interested in their app. And what they do is they bring musicians together to collaborate in a really cool way technologically, and it's getting a lot of buzz. So.
And we certainly do have that here. Is a lot of great musicians, and that's what LeBron's going to talk about right now. Because New Orleans has been famous for its music for a very, very long time. We've always wanted to just grow that music industry to support our musicians. How are we moving along now?
Well, we're moving along pretty well, and just as every other industry is coming out of what, the pandemic did to it, it's affected things in different ways. I think probably the worst news we've got, is the cancellation of a couple of our very large festivals in Voodoo and Buku more recently. However, the good news is that our big, benchmarks, French Quarter Fest, Jazz Festival, Essence Festival, all happened. Some of the others as well, Gretna Fest on the slate, and those are good things for us across the board. Those are things that sort of gave people a little bit more of okay, we can breathe a little bit, but our music industry doesn't just exist on the festival front. It also exists on the club side, on the ability for people to be able to make a living consistently by playing music in our city, and that appears to be fairly healthy. One of the big things that came out of the whole pandemic era, when in fact we weren't having our festivals, was the NOLA by NOLA creation, which really, sort of came about through Sig Greenbaum, who produced a number of festivals, and our folks, Mark Romig and everyone with the tourist folks, and pretty much became this thing where it was a nightclub tour of all of these places at a time when these clubs were shut down, that slated to continue to happen and create and called NOLA by NOLA, fashioned after the South by Southwest over in Texas thing, if you will, and having these small little festivals or club festivals happening. Another big thing happening along those fronts, the city's creation of the Nighttime Economy Office, which sort of ties in not only the bars and the music side, but also restaurants as well. Many folks see that as a very positive thing and a long overdue deal, but also patterned after some cities that are seeing successes with an office of that nature places like Seattle and New York, and also Atlanta as well. Our big music folks are continuing to sort of keep on keeping on. People like the P.J. Mortons and Trombone Shorties and all with national tours, and doing really, really well. John Baptiste. So all of those things continue to happen and all. And I think we're as healthy as we can be coming out of where we've been.
Yeah, I mean, certainly we don't have a shortage of talent here.
Yes,
It just, we have so many talented musicians. And certainly the concern has been, let's give them a place to play and earn some money, but also to have a music business infrastructure there to help them, like for publishing rights, because we have songwriters, and to be advised legally. Offbeat Magazine, of course, started over 35 years ago now to try to help build that cutting edge. The music conference also is another thing. So is that getting better, do you think?
It's getting better. We're not Nashville or any of those places on the publishing front, certainly not New York or LA, but I think that's a need and that's an aspiration for us to continue to work toward. There are rumblings of doing our best to sort of connect our music business to some of the successes we've had on the movie side here locally. Some of those very large budgets, and oftentimes the music used for a lot of these things, and a lot of these productions, be it television or movies, are not local artists. And, you certainly can't fashion that whole thing and make a producer use your stuff or a director or anything like that. But we have had these successes, and from time to time, we've had successes of being able to tie our music business to some of that. I think that is a growing deal, if you will. We certainly are getting better things like Cutting Edge and some of the support systems like the Jazz and Heritage Foundation, and what they do as well has helped to foster some of the growth. But we're not just there yet.
And Loyola University, I think, too, has a music business program. Okay,
Yep.
LeBron, thanks a lot. Over to Dave right now. In 1984, we had a World's Fair, and that served as a catalyst for CBD growth, didn't it?
It really did, and while it was a failure on so many levels, in fact, it was the last World's Fair to be held in the United States. There haven't been any since, and only one in North America ever since then. In fact, I don't think we've had one in the Western Hemisphere since 1986. But it went bankrupt. And it left a lot of people losing a whole lot of money. It was the first World's Fair to ever go bankrupt. And the federal government didn't support it the way it had other World's Fairs. And so a lot of contractors lost a lot of money, and a lot of people were in dire straits after that. That being said, it was a success to the end that it created a place for New Orleans to grow in the central business district, and did indeed light a fire, or at least stoke the coals of the tourism industry in New Orleans. Without it, there wouldn't be the convention center that we now have. The convention center opened for the World's Fair as an exposition space. All of the waste that was along the riverfront was cleaned up and removed from the downtown areas, so that now we can have a Harrah's Casino, we can have an Aquarium of the Americas, we can have a Jack's Brewery as we know it, and so on. So it really did literally and figuratively open up the central business district for the kind of economic development and growth in the tourism and convention business that we see now, that is the primary engine for the city of New Orleans in terms of revenue and economic development. And there's no doubt that it was successful in that, and that those areas that were used for the World's Fair have now become crucial parts of the downtown economy. And now we have 30,000 hotel rooms in New Orleans, and now we have a steady stream, at least prior to the pandemic, a steady stream of conventions wanting to come here, and major sporting events wanting to come here, because the infrastructure exists post-World's Fair to host those kinds of major events.
And we also have a very strong residential sector now, post-World's Fair, with all of those different warehouse buildings and those industry buildings being converted into living spaces, which also is a big part of the economy too.
Yeah, and there has definitely been an evolution, and not immediately after World's Fair, but really in the couple of decades most recently, of seeing the warehouse district converted into lofts and condos and trendy clubs and restaurants and things of that variety. No doubt that has helped. And we have even seen in the most recent transitions in the CBD, things like the Four Seasons coming in and taking over the World Trade Center and creating mixed use spaces that have ownership of condos, rentals of hotel spaces, retail and entertainment all mixed into one. And in fact, we've seen that model in a number of downtown buildings now where you get all of those things, where you can live in a building, you can shop in that building, you can find your entertainment needs fulfilled in that building, plus there are spaces there available for tourists to come and utilize in that building. And I think we're going to continue to see more of that. Downtown overall is healthy now, and especially with the tourism industry roaring back post-pandemic. It's definitely experiencing another renaissance, and the economy downtown is very strong. There are remaining questions about, how it will change post-pandemic, and if we will see more residential uses of were prior office spaces. Right. We are hearing efforts underway. I've talked to a couple of contractors that provide skilled crafts workers to numbers of projects, and much of their business has evolved into helping convert prior office space into residential space.
Right, because, obviously people couldn't go to their offices for a while there, and we're starting to become a little bit more hybrid in terms of, workspace or work from home. So how has that impacted our downtown?
Well, it's a wait and see still, because a lot of employers don't want to continue the remote work from home model. They want people in-house, collaborating in person. But the workers, by and large, surveys have showed, don't want to come back to the office. So it's going to be a push and tug, and it's going to be a struggle to see where it ends up and eventually how that works out. But we do know that a lot of office space has been converted to residential or entertainment use, and we'll see if that trend continues. I think only time will tell on that. But there's other trends we're waiting to see if they continue as well. We've had a good period of recycling of a lot of the downtown spaces, where older buildings that had limited purpose or limited use have been revitalized. Everything from clubs and restaurants to even parking garages, because one of the struggles in getting more people to move downtown was having enough places for them to park. On-street parking is pretty limited, particularly when you start moving into, from the French Quarter through the CBD and into the warehouse district. So we've seen a lot more parking structures being erected in places where prior was smaller buildings or surface level buildings or surface level uses. Right. So Dave, the evolution continues, no doubt.
Right.
If the business district is prosperous or doing better, it's good. But one spot that looks kind of bad is Canal Street. Especially Canal Street, the side opposite from the French Quarter. There's the old Lowe's State Theater, which is just derelict right now. There's an old hotel, and there's smaller businesses that are just closed. So something needs to happen on Canal, because it's so visual. It's one of the first things that people see when they come to New Orleans.
Well, there's no doubt that the struggles of the Claiborne corridor seem to be spreading, and they seem to be spreading from Claiborne up Canal Street. Now, of course, the medical district is thriving on the other side, but you're right, there's kind of that no man's land, that gap in between that the developers really haven't figured out a successful use for. And I think we do have a bit of a jack-o'-lantern effect throughout the central business district now, where there are spots that just can't seem to get up and going, and that's going to be a challenge moving forward.
All right, Dave, thanks a lot. And we're going to wrap up with E. You kind of wanted to reflect on how a very significant piece of legislation impacted our economy.
Yeah, in 1964, the Civil Rights Bill passed, which of course was a national bill, and being what it was, there was a lot of debate and anger and hard feelings. But beyond the social decency of the bill, in retrospect, it also did a lot of unanticipated consequences, because in a sense, it liberated towns like New Orleans and probably others. The big problem was that a lot of businesses didn't want to go to a place that was segregated, and they didn't want to go to a place where the theaters and the restaurants, and they weren't going to come. So we really didn't have much national participation. There were not any national hotels in New Orleans prior to that bill passing. After that, and of course also anticipation of World's Fair coming, we got Hilton, Sheraton, Marriott, and then others that came. Now, when they came, first of all, they built big buildings. They had real marketing expertise. They had huge lists of past customers, and so they were able to market themselves. And they also formed essentially the foundation of a tourism business and really helped gel it together because it was in their interest to promote tourism and to get things going. And like one thing they wanted was an expanded convention center. And it was like these new hotels that really helped expand the convention center. A big thing that localities wanted during that time were pro football teams. And the NFL had pretty much stayed away from the South before that. Once it passed, they were interested in putting a franchise in New Orleans. But what really got their interest was the promise of a Superdome, putting a Superdome. Now, Houston had put an Astrodome. So they said, well, we could do that, but how are we going to pay for it? They paid for it with the hotel industry, those taxes for the hotel things. And so those hotels and that new tourism industry that developed after the period really put a lot of, not just economic prosperity, but marketing prosperity in New Orleans. And it was all for the better.
Right, and economic growth. As you said, it was definitely all for the better. Okay, so right now let's kind of go around the table. I just want to get your thoughts on what do you think would be needed now to continue help growing out our economy, to make it better? And E, we're going to stick with you.
Well, we need those sandstorms off the coast of Africa to continue because they're bringing up the wind shear. So
Goes to hair and dust.
Yeah, maybe we can install like big fans
Right.
off the coastline. Also, we're really got to deal with the police problem, not just as crime prevention, but there are things we just need more police for. For example, Mardi Gras might be in trouble in a few years if we have dwindling police. That I can envision the possibility of fewer crews and shorter routes. Wow. And Mardi Gras is a big catalyst. So I think that's something we really need to deal with.
Tony, over to you.
Well, yeah, there's a list, crime, infrastructure, and so on. But for my money, the biggest single thing I think for long term would be education, and proper fundamental education for the populace, which creates not just little worker bees, but proper citizens. And I think Calvin Mackey's STEM center work that he's done, the new premises that he's got over in New Orleans East, is a really good model for the kind of investment that's required from the private sector and from the public as well.
He's STEM NOLA, right?
Mm-hmm. STEM NOLA, yeah.
LeBron, so over to you.
Yeah, I think the big one for me is affordable housing. We are struggling in that regard. It's not just a local problem, it's a national problem with skyrocketing, the prices of homes going up. But even for rentals, this used to be a fairly affordable place to live, and we are still a tourism sort of based economy here, which requires those workers to have some place to live, and that continues to be a tough one.
It does. Dave, quickly.
I'm going to bring it full circle. Errol started talking about the lack of a middle class that was identified decades ago. We still need a stronger, larger middle class in New Orleans before we really can see the economic development that we're all talking about wanting.
Okay. All right, guys, thank you very much. Very interesting discussion. Thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.
Informed Sources is made possible in part by Susie and Pierre G. Villery.
With a lifetime of passion for public television, we are pleased to help underwrite Informed Sources.
Please join us in supporting WYES-TV.